This is a News 8 special presentation, the Connecticut Governor's Race, Republican Primary Forum.
Hello and welcome. I'm News 8 Chief Political Correspondent Mark Davis, live in New Haven. And we want to welcome you to this Republican Primary Forum for Connecticut's Governor's Race. Joining us for this live hour, an hour-long forum, are the two Republican candidates for governor here in Connecticut. That is former U.S. Ambassador to Ireland and 2010 nominee for governor Tom Foley, as well as State Senator John McKinney, who has served as minority leader in the state Senate since June of 2007. Now, also joining us this morning is Susan Haig of the Associated Press, who will be helping moderate at this forum and asking the candidates questions as well. If you actually have done any reading in the state of Connecticut online or in any of the great newspapers, you have read Susan's work. She is very highly regarded at the state capitol and across the state. Now, our format today is being called a forum, so we do not have any rigid rules. Each candidate will be allotted, however, as much time as they need to answer and respond to each question. We'll try to rein it in if people start repeating or whatever. In addition to the questions from Susan and me, viewer questions, our News 8 viewers will also be included, those questions that were submitted on our website, WTNH.com, as well as our News 8 cameras on the streets of Connecticut. So let's begin. A lot of people are wondering about the gun laws in our state. Dozens of viewers expressed interest in knowing what you plan to do about gun control. We had so many of these, it was kind of hard to pick, but James from Vernon submitted this question online asking, if you are elected governor, do you have any plans to modify or repeal the gun legislation that was pushed through the state government? If you plan to modify the legislation, what are those plans? Let's start with you, John McKinney, because you were intimately involved with this because Newtown's in your district. You worked with the Democrats in the legislature and the governor and the families. They almost use your office as a headquarters for talking to legislators. Answer the question, if you will.
Well, I think the answer to the question is, as governor, I'm not going to focus on repealing the gun bill or making modifications to that law. I'm going to focus on growing our economy, creating jobs. Dan Malloy is going to leave either one of us a $2.8 billion budget deficit. That's after the largest tax increase in our state's history. We've seen our economy in Connecticut lag around the rest of our states around us in the region because of the Malloy tax increase. So my focus is going to be on jobs and the economy. As you mentioned, Mark, I've been fortunate to represent Newtown for 16 years in the state Senate. I was their only voice in the state Senate and was at the firehouse with them that day. And I have always felt it's your obligation as an elected official to represent your constituents, and was proud to represent them in every way possible.
Well, let me just say before we get to Tom's response to this that I read all of these questions, and I talk to a lot of people, and I hear from a lot of people via email and other social media. Many of the gun owners in the state of Connecticut tell me that they think the law, part of the law on the gun restrictions, was an overreaction to what happened in Newtown. What do you say to that?
Well, what I say is, I've talked to a lot of them. I respect their opinion and respect some differences that we might have. At the end of the day, my job was to represent my constituents. A lot of times in politics, people stand on the sidelines, criticize what you do, rather than roll up their sleeves, get in and try to work on things. I've never been the type who wants to sit on the sidelines and criticize, and that was the case after Newtown and in every situation since. So, I rolled up my sleeves. I got into the room with an overwhelming majority of Democrats and the governor, who quite frankly wanted to go a lot further than where they did. We have a problem in Connecticut with one-party rule. We have a problem where, as Republicans, we're in the severe minority. That's what I think, quite frankly, the both of us are hoping to change come November of 2014.
All right, Tom, you have said many, many times that you don't like some of the restrictions in this law. Would you change it? Would you try to change it?
Well, first of all, terrible tragedy in Newtown. Totally appropriate for the government to have a response that provided comfort to the families that were there, and certainly do what they could to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. And I said at the time that the governor should focus on only policy changes that would prevent another Newtown from happening. And he went way beyond that. And in some respects, Senator McKinney actually advocated for restrictions that the governor wasn't advocating for. So this was an overreaching bill. It delved into
what
things
did he
that
advocate that the governor didn't want?
Well, certain restrictions on law-abiding gun owners with respect to weapons that wouldn't be permitted in Connecticut or required a license. So many of these things would not prevent a future Newtown. To that extent, I think it was an overreach. And I think that somebody who was a stronger leader at the time would have taken more into consideration people who believe they have a fundamental right to own and bear arms, and they're law-abiding citizens. And I think their rights were trampled on in many respects. So if the legislature chose to revisit the bill and that there were corrections or simplifications they could make that would reduce some of the onerous provisions on law-abiding citizens, I would support that.
But you wouldn't initiate it.
I wouldn't.
They would have to come to you.
We have a Democrat-controlled legislature. I think a governor initiating that
Right.
is a Republican.
Right, but there are some Democrats who
Yes.
think this went too far too.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
but you would wait for them.
Yes.
Any in response, Senator, before we move on?
Well, I certainly don't agree that we initiated restrictions beyond what the governor wanted to do. If you read what the governor's task force has come up with, I think you'd be shocked at some of the things they want to do with respect to the right to bear arms in the state of Connecticut. But, you know, one of the things that is frustrating is the fact that Tom, you've talked about the fact that your bill would have been different and that the restrictions went too far, but you still won't say whether or not you would support a ban on assault weapons or whether you would support a ban on large capacity magazines. And as I've traveled around the state, I think people are frustrated by your unwillingness to answer that. I know we may disagree, and I respect those disagreements, but I think we need to be specific about the answers we give to people because, you know, to beat Dan Malloy, we're going to have to be very specific, and I still think you need to answer those questions at some point.
Well, those restrictions have already been made, and as we've recognized, they're unlikely to be changed unless this legislature takes some action. What I've talked about, and I've been very clear about it, Senator, is that this bill failed to address the root cause of what happened in Newtown, which was a mental health problem. And I've talked at length about the failure of the legislature and previous governors to fill in for families the institutional support that's needed for people between the age of 18 and 65 who have family members with serious mental health issues, which I've also acknowledged publicly that I have a sister who has serious mental health issues. So this is something that's missing in the state. This is so clearly something that had to do with the tragedy in Newtown, and why you, as a legislator who's been there for 15 years, couldn't help this governor figure that out is beyond me. And instead, you reached into things that had nothing to do with what happened in Newtown.
Well, I think if you read the bill, you'd understand that there are some positive changes towards helping people with mental health. We've talked about this. If you're between 18 and 25 in the state of Connecticut, particularly young men, there are no services, little to no services, unless you're very poor or very wealthy. We've made some steps in providing those services. We've taken some steps in terms of identifying kids at a younger age so you can intervene with services at an early age. There's still a long way to go on mental health issues. There's a struggle within the community of whether you use institutionalization for people with mental health or whether you work more in a local community-based group home setting, which a lot of parents advocate for. Quite frankly, there's been a constant struggle about that, and the system can't afford to spend overwhelming amounts of money in both. So there's more we need to do. We also took a major initiative in that bill with respect to protecting our schools in terms of identifying kids and doing that. In fact, one of the national experts on school safety and identifying kids with mental health issues talked about the fact that some of the changes we could make, which we did make, could actually prevent something like that from happening again.
Right, and there was also security with regard to bricks and mortar with regard to that. So have we exhausted this?
Well, I'd just like to say one more
Sure.
thing. Here's a good example of what I call a career politician. Now, John's saying that he was behind and supported and fully embraced the bill on a part of it that he wants to talk about, but the parts of it where he has stepped on people who believe they have fundamental rights, he's distancing himself from.
Well, no,
You're
I'm
either
not,
for the
no,
bill
I'm
or
not.
you weren't.
No, Tom, I voted for
And
the
you
bill.
voted for the
I
bill,
voted
and
for the
you're a
bill,
big advocate for the bill,
and
so-
I represented the people in
Yes,
Newtown,
you did.
and you know, to be honest with you, Tom, I was there that day. I've lived through it with those people. I saw the pain they had. You were 6,500 votes away from being their governor at the time. You didn't offer any help for the people in Newtown during that tragedy. I did vote to restrict assault weapons and large capacity magazines.
Good.
Would
Just
you
as long as
support?
that's clear.
Would you support a ban on large capacity magazines? A yes or no question.
I
Can you
told
answer
the
that?
governor at the time that we shouldn't go beyond what would have prevented another Newtown.
So you're
I'm not
against,
exactly sure
are you
what that
against
was,
a ban
because
on large capacity magazines? Yes or no?
I have said that I wouldn't have supported that bill. It would have been a very different bill had I been governor.
So with all due respect, you sound
would've-
like the career politician, because I've said yes, I support it, and you won't say yes or no. That's the career politician answer. Avoid the question, don't answer yes or no.
I don't think we're going to go any further on this, but we gave it a lot of time because we got a lot of questions about this. This is obviously going to be a factor in this primary. Susan, let's turn it over to you. Susan Haig of the Associated Press.
I was wondering what your opinion is of Connecticut's new medical marijuana industry. They're going to start providing product late summer, early fall. And also, in addition to that, do you support legislation that would legalize marijuana for recreational use?
Is that for me?
Sure.
Yeah.
I am concerned about it. I'm very sympathetic with cancer patients and other people with medical needs that believe that medical marijuana will ease their pain or address their problems. But marijuana is a gateway drug, and we have very significant drug abuse problems here in Connecticut. So I'm worried about gateway drugs being present in any form. And so I think we need to be very careful that medical marijuana does not leak out and become available as a gateway drug, particularly for young people in our communities. I do not support recreational use of marijuana in Connecticut.
Do you think there are enough protections right now in place so, like you say, the medical marijuana won't leak out?
This is something new in Connecticut, and it's forming up as we're speaking. As governor, I would want to make sure that we protected those areas and made sure it did not leak out. I think that would be a very important initiative.
Senator?
I did not support the medical marijuana law. You know, my mom just passed away of cancer. My father died of AIDS. Both diseases and illnesses that people advocated on behalf of for this law. But at the end of the day, marijuana is still a controlled substance. It's illegal under federal law to possess it. And I don't know how the government in the state of Connecticut and the legislature could pass a law allowing people to violate federal law, commit a crime in effect. And the only reason why they justified it was because they said President Obama said he won't enforce the laws. Well, I find a big problem with that as well. So you can put all the controls in the bill you want, but it's not going to prevent people from getting easier access to marijuana under this bill. I think it's going to lead to legalization, and I would oppose legalization. I've had loved ones and family members who've struggled with addiction issues. Marijuana is clearly a gateway drug. There is evidence that it causes damage to the brain. And I think if you look at what happened in Colorado, where it's now legal, they have sent a message in Colorado to teenagers and young children across the state that marijuana is not that bad. And we're going to see more teenagers and young kids start using drugs in Colorado because of the legalization. And I certainly hope we don't do that in Connecticut.
Doesn't sound like there's a lot of disagreement on this issue. So shall we move on? Okay. If you're just joining us, that's Susan Haig of the Associated Press News Service. I'm Chief Political Correspondent Mark Davis, live here in New Haven, and we're here with the two Republican candidates for governor who are facing off in the primary on Tuesday. Now, here at News 8, we always have your back, as you know. Our cameras hit the streets this week to find out what people would like to ask the candidates, as well as soliciting them on the website. Listen carefully now for a question from Brenda in Burlington.
I would ask what their position is on the income tax and whether or not they would make any changes or modifications to it.
All right, now a lot of people directed this question towards Senator McKinney because of your campaign advertisements that have made a big deal about this. So why don't we start with you and then come back to Mr.
Sure, and I hope Brenda's watching, and thank her for the question. Mark, we fundamentally, and I'm sure Tom and I agree on this, the state of Connecticut spends too much money and our government's too big. Dave Walker and I have put together a plan to reduce state spending $1.4 billion in the first year, shrink the size of state government, and when you do that, you balance your budget, create a surplus, and we believe there needs to be tax relief because of the financial situation the governor has left us. We've targeted our tax relief at a large group of people at the middle class, under $75,000. So we'll eliminate the income tax in the second year for anyone who makes $75,000
This is
or less.
couples?
It's any individual who files, whether they file jointly or separately, at $75,000 or less. It affects 1 million of about 1.7 million taxpayers in the state of Connecticut. Governor Malloy gave us the largest tax increase in history, $1.8 billion. Most of that was paid by the middle class, so they're the ones who deserve the tax relief
What's
first.
the revenue loss to the state?
The revenue loss is about $750 million. That's a conservative
So you
figure.
think you can cut that much?
We know we can do it. If you reduce spending $1.4 billion in the first year, hold that tight in the second year, you've got almost $450 million towards a $750 million tax cut, and we use very conservative economic growth assumptions. The governor, when he goes talking about the fact that we don't have a budget deficit, which shows you how out of touch Governor Malloy is, he uses economic growth projections that no economist and no business leader predicts.
Tom, so are you ready to cut the income tax?
Hey, I've been very specific about what I would do. I would cut the sales tax first by 0.5%. It's a very broad-based tax. It saves everybody
Let's see, it's
money.
6.35 now.
Right, it will go down to 5.85. And that puts money in everybody's pockets. Senator McKinney's proposal is very narrow. It would only help some people and not help others. So I have more broad-based tax relief planned. And then I want to look at, among other tax relief, I've talked about the business entity tax and getting rid of any tax that costs more to collect than it generates in revenue. But we need to stand back and look at comprehensive tax reform. And within that, I think there are adjustments to the income tax that would keep businesses and keep people from leaving the state of Connecticut. But the problem with Senator McKinney's proposal is when you add up all the numbers, I think Malloy math might be contagious here. They don't add up. And with Senator McKinney's proposal, he'd have to raise somebody else's taxes in order to provide that tax relief. So the question, that's kind of the unanswered question, whose taxes is he going to raise and by how much?
Under your plan, a $10 item would go down about $1. It doesn't sound like very much.
Well, you'd be surprised. It's about $300 million that people pay, and it falls disproportionately on people who are on tight budgets. It's the most regressive tax we have. So the people
Right, because it affects everyone. Right.
It affects, well, no, it falls harder on lower income people than higher income people. And so
that's a liberal Democratic argument, you know that.
Well, but it's the biggest stimulator on the economy because those people will spend that tax increase. People who have more income won't spend it, they'll save it, and that doesn't have the same effect on jobs.
This is a good debate to have. Tom's called my tax relief program, which affects 1 million tax filers out of 1.7, so more than 50% of the tax filers in the state narrow. He's admitted that his tax cut is about $300 million. Our tax cut is $750 million. It's hard to argue that having $300 million back in the economy is better than $750 million back in the economy. And we'd like to give tax relief to everybody. But when you're looking at how you can provide tax relief first, given the fact that we're facing significant budget deficits, focusing on the middle class because they got hit the hardest by Dan Malloy, we think is most important. For example, Connecticut taxes pensions and Social Security more than other states. It's why so many of our seniors leave for places like Florida. A lot of nurses, teachers, and other hardworking people retire with salaries, Social Security, pensions at $75,000 or less. This will eliminate their tax liability and keep them here in the state of Connecticut, and that's something very important. And with respect to the specifics, we've detailed how we would reduce spending by $1.4 billion. We've put the numbers out there. We've been criticized for it because, quite frankly, they're very tough decisions you have to make. But I know that because I've actually built state budgets, line by line, department by department, agency by agency. I know how to do that. That's one of the reasons why I'm the better candidate to run for governor. So there will be no tax increases in our budget. Nobody's suggested that other than you here today, Tom.
Well, it should be noted here that Governor Malloy said back in April that he didn't think he could do anything but cut taxes in a second term, but he was talking about the kinds of things that you're talking about, little tiny ones. All right, actually, there isn't enough time in this segment to go to another question, so why don't we take the break? We'll have more with the Republican candidates for governor running in Tuesday's primary coming up. Stay with us.
You're watching a News 8 special presentation, the Connecticut Governor's Race, Republican Primary Forum.
Hello and welcome back. I'm News 8 Chief Political Correspondent Mark Davis, here live in New Haven today with the two Republican candidates for governor running in Tuesday's primary, as well as Susan Haig from the Associated Press News Service. And she has the next question. So, Susan,
just to follow up, I'll get a little bit about the budget type issues. Where are there places in the budget where you both think should be streamlined? Which agencies do you think should be made smaller? Which programs? And on the flip side, are there areas where you think more resources need to be dedicated?
Well, I think in a first instance, we have to look at management in the state of Connecticut. Study after study has shown that our state employee levels are top-heavy. And even Dan Malloy, when he ran for governor in 2010, talked about this. The difference is he did nothing about it. In part of our plan, we've been very specific that we will look at streamlining and making efficient our management structure in the state. That means a reduction of non-union management employees of over 1,000 people because, quite frankly, we need to be as lean and as efficient as you would be in the private sector. The private industry has been dealing with tough economic times, making tough decisions. The state hasn't. Those lean efficiencies and a hiring freeze thereafter can save a couple of $100 million in your budget, and that's absolutely critical. The second thing that I think we ought to do is we ought to bring in an Office of Inspector General. That would be a new office. It wouldn't be an office that is subject to control by the governor or the legislature. It'd be an office to protect the taxpayers. They would have audit and subpoena power that can go in and root out waste, fraud, and abuse in state government. Those are two specific examples I would give you right now.
First of all, it's important to understand how the government budgets, because this $1.4 billion increase assumes about a 7% increase in spending. When I'm governor, I'm going to say, you're not spending a nickel more overall than we spent last year. And I'm going to do that for 2 years. That's a 7% cut over what Governor Malloy is going to be talking about spending. With making that commitment alone gets rid of the deficit. That's a $1.4 billion increase in spending that's going to go away. Now, there are many opportunities to save money within state government. What I would do is take those savings and spend them in two areas. Number one is we have to protect the Special Transportation Fund. Senator McKinney and Governor Malloy have been raiding the Special Transportation Fund. As a result, the White House recently graded our roads and bridges the worst in the country. That's simply disgraceful. It's directly the result of governors and legislators taking funds that were committed from the gas tax that were supposed to go to maintaining our roads and bridges and spending them on other programs. In many cases, just their pet programs for insiders and pals. The other area is we have to invest more in our schools. Governor Malloy is spending less money as a percent of the budget on schools. His education reform initiative, which I call Education Reform Light, which really wasn't going to have much impact on educational outcomes, never really ended up being funded. And so the amount of money available to schools as a percent of the budget has dropped under Governor Malloy. We simply have to do more to help the 100,000 young people in schools, primarily our inner city schools, who are not getting a decent education. America is all about fairness and opportunity. And if you aren't providing a young person a decent education, that's not fair, and they're not going to have the opportunity that we promise all our citizens. That would be a high priority for me as governor.
See, and this is one of the areas where Tom and I look at the budget very differently. Tom's just said that not having an increase in spending is a cut, and it's not a cut. Cut is actually when you spend less money one year than you spent the year before. That's what I've proposed. He's also said that he's just not going to let anything go up. The problem with that, Tom, is that there are almost $900 million of contractually guaranteed increases in the budget next year. So if you're not going to be specific about how you're going to reduce spending by that $900 million, you're actually going to be increasing. And that's why we were very specific with our spending cuts. And let me be very clear, because you know the answer to this, and I think you're very misleading. Governor Malloy took $542 million at the end of the day, all in, out of the Special Transportation Fund, and I voted against every single one of those budgets. In fact, you actually even criticized me in a TV ad for voting for a budget with Governor Rell that all Republicans and Democrats supported, that made the largest, most significant investment in our transportation infrastructure, in our rail line, in our New Haven rail yard. So you say that I voted to take money out of the Special Transportation Fund when I actually fought against Dan Malloy doing it, and yet you criticize me for making the investments in the rail line. So you're trying to have it both ways. We need to make critical investments in our rail line. It's the single most important economic development tool in the state of Connecticut right now. We have $3 billion of upgrades that need to be made, and we need leaders who are going to be willing to take the tough votes to do that spending.
Good. Well, I'm glad you brought up that transportation bill, because I did criticize you for it in the ad, but not for the part of it that was investing in transportation. There was a huge tax increase in there, John, $140 million a year currently, raising the gross receipts tax. And you have repeatedly voted for tax increases. You have repeatedly voted for budgets that resulted in very significant increases in spending. So you've had some kind of an epiphany here in the last 3 weeks, and all of a sudden you're a fiscal conservative, when I've been talking about these kind of changes needed for Connecticut government for over 4 years. So I'm glad you finally come on board and seen the light, but your voting record certainly doesn't support what you're talking about right now. So.
Here's every budget I voted on over 16 years. Hold on.
Yeah.
Every budget I voted on over 16 years.
Every one of them had a spending increase in it.
You just said tax increase, Tom. I've had 10
No,
budgets.
I said you've voted repeatedly for tax increases.
Yeah, repeatedly for tax
them?
increases. Go ahead, list the tax increases I voted for.
The gross receipts tax.
Okay, that's one.
The cigarette tax.
That's two.
The gross receipts tax on municipal utilities, it drives up everybody's electric bills.
That's not true, Tom.
Yes, you did.
Okay, so let's look at that, Tom. I've had 10 budget votes over 16 years that increased taxes,
reduce spending?
and I voted against all. I voted against all of them but one.
Did any
I had
reduce spending?
5 budget votes. Are you going to let me answer? I had 5 budget votes that actually cut taxes, and I voted to cut taxes hundreds of millions of dollars that passed. Now let's talk about the one tax increase, the cigarette tax increase. In that bill, we exempted things from the sales tax, which reduced people's taxes. As you just said, the sales tax is a broad-based tax that affects everybody. And most importantly, Tom, it started the film tax credit. In your own hometown of Greenwich, Blue Sky Cinemas has brought in hundreds of jobs because of that film tax credit. ESPN, NBC Sports, digital film production has blossomed over the state of Connecticut because of that film tax credit. Are you telling me that you would vote against the film tax credit because you wouldn't want to increase the cost of cigarettes?
No, what I'm telling you
Well, that's a choice you had, Tom. So you're saying you would have voted with me then?
No, what I'm saying is, you're talking like a career politician. You're
No, Tom,
raising
I'm talking
taxes,
about leadership.
and now
I'm
you're
talking about
explaining
leadership, Tom.
why this is good for everybody.
Tom,
I don't
Tom,
think people
Tom,
think raising taxes is
Tom,
being helpful.
A cigarette tax of 50 cents in exchange for the film tax credit is a trade
What
I'll
about the
take
gross
every day.
receipts tax on taxes? $140 million a year.
So
on
let's get this
people when
straight.
they go
Let's
up to
get this
the pump.
straight. You live in Greenwich. If you understand the people who I've represented for 16 years, as I hope you do, you would understand that our rail cars were costing us jobs. People were leaving
These are all
Fairfield County.
excuses, but you raised taxes,
No, Tom,
John, repeatedly.
Tom, it's called leadership.
Raising taxes is leadership? Is
No,
that
Tom,
how you'd lead as governor?
342 rail cars, fixing the rail yard here in New Haven. By the way, in that bill, there was also programs in transportation for the elderly and disabled. There was also the State Pier New London. Are
But
you
you
going to tell the
raised
people of New...
taxes.
Tom, you have to pay for things. And you don't want to answer a single question. You want to be devoid of specifics. You would have voted against new rail cars for Metro North. You would have voted against the rail line in New Haven. You would have voted against the pier in New London, Tom.
John,
That's a job killer.
we need to wrap
That's a
this
job
up because
killer.
we're
So-
getting long
So
on this.
you're against creating jobs in Connecticut?
One more
No,
thought, Tom.
John,
then we'll
you're
move on.
defending raising taxes.
No, Tom, I'm defending taking a leadership position and fixing our rail line. It does cost money to fix a rail line. You would acknowledge that, right?
We're repeating
you
ourselves
have to
now.
pay for it.
Gentlemen,
May
we're
I finish
repeating.
answering the question? The other aspect of managing spending is you need to have had some experience and develop some skills. For 35 years, I've been running large organizations, and in the private sector, an important part of that is making them efficient and lean and run smoothly and be effective at delivering the services or products or whatever they're engaged in doing. I actually have experience doing this. John has no experience doing this, so why would anybody, first of all, trust John, who's all of a sudden had an epiphany that we need to cut expenses when he's been repeatedly voting to raise expenses, and he has absolutely no experience running a large organization or leading in an executive role.
And this is a great point because Republican governors across the country, John Kasich in Ohio, Chris Christie, who endorsed you because of all your fundraising in New Jersey, Nikki Haley in South Carolina, Scott Walker in Wisconsin, their backgrounds, like mine, Tom, legislative experience, working in government, none of them had the background you have. The best Republican governors in our country didn't manage anything like you say. Their experience was like mine. That's why I'm the better candidate to be governor.
Okay, hold it right there. Just for those of you who are Googling, wondering what the gross receipts tax is, a lot of people don't know. That's a percentage of the wholesale price of gas and oil. Right now, obviously, it's going down because the price of gas and oil is going down, but it goes up and down. That's what the gross receipts tax is. All right, before we go to the break, we have time for this question? Okay, let's hear from Maureen. Listen carefully in Southington. Listen.
I would ask them how they are going to keep businesses in Connecticut.
This viewer is obviously a Republican because this is a big Republican issue. Well, Malloy says it's his issue too. Shall we start with Tom Foley?
Right. So I come out of the private sector. I've run businesses. I'm a businessman. And so I know what businesses need to hear in order to either stay in Connecticut and continue to invest here and grow, or to come here. And what this governor's been doing, with Senator McKinney's support, because he voted for his First Five program and other corporate welfare programs, is he's anti-business. So a lot of the mandates that the legislature and this governor have put on businesses that raise their costs and raise their cost of electricity, for example, also raise it for consumers, compliance costs, overzealous regulatory environment. These are things that drive businesses out of the state.
Malloy says the price of electricity has gone down during his term.
That's not true.
I mean, I know that the companies are asking for increases now, but that's to cover their infrastructure that was destroyed in the storms a couple of years ago. That's only to be expected, isn't it?
You think electricity prices have come down in Connecticut?
The generation rates are, he says they've come down.
Well, electric bills have not come down. So, both for consumers and for businesses. So these are all things that make moving more attractive to other environments.
But what's wrong with the First Five? I mean, that's
so
those
here's what's wrong with it, because the reason we need it is because the state's anti-business from the mandates and other costs that are put on employers. So they have to bribe employers to stay here with hundreds of millions of dollars, actually over $1 billion of taxpayer money to get companies like UTC to stay here, even though shortly after signing the agreement, they're moving executive jobs to Florida, apparently. $300 million to get Jackson Labs to come here for 300 jobs, $1 million of taxpayer money per job. That makes absolutely no sense. So Senator McKinney voted for this bill. All you have to do is stop being anti-business, and you don't have to hand out all this corporate welfare
Tom,
and taxpayer money.
I voted against the Jackson Labs bill, and you know that.
But you voted for the First Five program.
No, Tom, there was never a vote on giving $115 million to Ray Dalio. There was never a vote to give money to Cigna or Alexion or ESPN. The governor initially talked about funding to bring companies who are not in Connecticut into Connecticut, which Jody Rell, John Rowland, Lowell Weicker, Bill O'Neill have all used that tactic, and I think you and I would probably use that as well. How do we fix jobs in our economy? First, the state has to get its fiscal house in order. We need to balance our budget. We need to reduce spending. We need to shrink the size of state government. Then we need to give tax relief to people and businesses across the state of Connecticut. Business leaders will not invest in the state of Connecticut because they can't trust government. We need to get our long-term debt under control. One of the differences Tom and I have is he's okay with Dan Malloy's deal with the union. I'm not. We need to tackle that long-term debt. That will send the message to
How do you do that when they have no open until 2022 or something?
Let me just say one more thing, though. I did vote against the Jackson Labs bill, but I also voted for the UTC bill. That was not a corporate handout. Those were existing tax credits that Sikorsky and Pratt & Whitney had already earned that we accelerated. What we should do is accelerate that for other businesses. You look at Eastern Connecticut, where Pfizer, Electric Boat have lost jobs. We have General Electric here in Connecticut. They would benefit by getting those tax credits as well. But you know, Tom, you should know in Shelton and in Seymour and in Stratford and Milford, Ansonia, the Valley, Sikorsky is the lifeline for those families there. And that bill, allowing them to use existing tax credits, kept Sikorsky in the state, while as governor, I will actually reduce the cost of business, which will keep Sikorsky
Tom,
here.
before you answer,
But it's surprising that Tom Foley would be against keeping Sikorsky in Connecticut.
Can
It's
you explain
shocking,
to me
quite frankly.
how you open up these union contracts when John Rowland signed them, the deal that says they can't be open until 2025?
The same way Jody Rell and Dan Malloy opened up the contract. Mark, defined benefit plans don't exist in the real world anymore, and it's time they didn't exist in government. And we ought to have new employees hired by the state of Connecticut go into defined contribution, 401k type plans. Tom's idea, you can't do that until 2022. My idea is you have to start doing that right away.
All right, let's get Tom's point of view in here.
Yeah. Well, again, John's using career politician talk. He's saying tax credits are okay. Tax credits are spending. In the federal government, they call it as tax credits actually go on the spending side of the budget. So all you've spent $400 million to bribe
Tom, it's not spending not to tax people. Now you're thinking like a Democrat.
No, that is spending.
A tax credit is not taxing something. That's not spending by government. That's letting people keep their own money.
It's spending money. It's considered an expenditure.
You're a good Democrat if you believe that.
Listen, there are ways to keep employers here, including UTC. Nobody's for having any UTC jobs leaving Connecticut, but just paying them hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money isn't the right way to go. You provide an environment that works for them to be able to reduce their costs, make them as competitive as they can be, and want to stay and invest here.
But those were unused credits, from what I understand.
There are no checks being written by the state of Connecticut to United Technologies to keep Sikorsky. Let's be very clear about that.
It's revenue that's not coming in. So
it's their money,
spending.
Tom, just like it's people's money. We ought to let them keep it.
You're suggesting offering this to other businesses.
Absolutely.
This is just spending. That means that the taxpayers are going to have to make up the difference if the company isn't paying the taxes.
So cutting taxes is
have to pay these taxes.
Cutting taxes is spending, and cutting taxes means other people have to pay for it. Actually, Tom, cutting taxes is going to grow our economy. People are going to invest more, create jobs. You should know that.
So let me get back to the woman's question, because 70% of jobs are created by small businesses. Every large business started off being a small business, and you want them to become a large business because that creates new jobs. So I've talked about eliminating the business entity tax for employers that have fewer than 50 employees.
Well, what is that, $250 a year?
It's $250 a year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I can tell you one thing. It really is annoying to small businesses, merchants, people that have 1, 2, 3 employees.
Well, sure. Somebody running a sandwich shop with 5 employees.
It's actually paid every other year, and I voted to cut it in half. One of the tax cuts I did vote for.
But it's annoying. It sends a signal that we don't appreciate you. We're not trying to support you. And as governor, I know that business people need and want to hear that. And there are many states in North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas. Rick Perry's saying, "Come on down," and Connecticut's just saying, we don't care about you, we're just going to tax the heck out of you, we're going to load you up with all kinds of expenses and regulations and mandates, and people are sick and tired of it. But as a business person and as a governor, I can send a very strong signal right away and say, hold on now, we're going to change this. We're going to come out and support you, we're going to work with you, we're going to try and get your costs down, we want you to stay and invest here. We can restore pride and prosperity in Connecticut, and we need you to do it.
All right, we're going to take a break. I think we've exhausted that. We'll come back with more with the candidates for governor running in Tuesday's Republican primary here in Connecticut. Stay with us.
You're watching a News 8 special presentation, the Connecticut Governor's Race Republican Primary Forum.
Hello again. I'm Chief Political Correspondent Mark Davis here with the 2 Republican candidates running for governor in Tuesday's primary, as well as Susan Haig from the Associated Press News Service, joining us live for this Republican Party primary forum in the Connecticut governor's race. Now, many families across the state are wondering about Common Core. Matthew, a teacher, submitted this question on our website, WTNH.com. Recently, the Common Core curriculum has become a hot topic debate and a subject to propaganda, he says. What do you know about Common Core? What is your plan to deal with Common Core? Does it need to be dealt with? If so, what parts exactly need to change? And how do you plan on changing them? I think Tom started the last time, so why don't we have John start this time?
Well, I think Matthew, for his question, you know, my older brother's been a public school teacher in the Bridgeport Public Schools for over 20 years. And I fully understand through his experiences how difficult it is to be a teacher on the front lines. My 3 kids went to our public schools in Fairfield. Common Core was passed by bureaucrats. The State Board of Education passed it in 2010. We never got a vote in the state legislature on it, and it's now been imposed and implemented horribly by Governor Malloy and Commissioner Pryor. That's why I called for the resignation of Commissioner Pryor. Top-down policies don't work. Education policies need to be grounded at the front lines by teachers and administrators. Teachers and administrators were never asked to buy into or support or create Common Core curriculum standards. And that's why, as governor, I've said I'm going to repeal it. I'm going to appoint a commissioner who has experience in the Connecticut public school classrooms, and we're going to start talking to teachers, parents, and administrators across the state to build the right curriculum for us here in Connecticut. The top-down approach, Common Core, doesn't work. We can't have it in some schools versus others. We need to get rid of it altogether.
Tom Foley.
Yeah. Senator McKinney voted for Governor Malloy's education bill and education initiative, and his implementation of Common Core was very much part of this. I've been very outspoken against mandating Common Core across the state. I believe in, and I think it's fundamental to the greatness of America, that local control, when it works, is the best option. And for Governor Malloy to have come in and mandated teacher evaluations and Common Core assessments on all schools in Connecticut, many of which are some of the best schools in the country, is a mistake. Again, I have private sector experience. I'm a problem solver. I know that if you're going to be an effective problem solver and make change, don't go fixing problems and fixing things that aren't broken. And so in towns with very good school districts and excellent schools that already have very good assessments and teacher evaluation protocols, they were loading extra work on them, takes teachers out of the classroom. Very annoying, very ineffective, and I'm certainly against it.
Mark, you can't have,
clear about that.
Part of Common Core is the Smarter Balanced Assessment Test. It's a horrible test. Most of our kids haven't even been taught the subjects that are tested there. My own 8th grader last year, who was taking algebra, said, half of the math questions they had never been taught. But you can't have that test in some school districts, not in others, which is why you have to get rid of it. With respect to Governor Malloy's education reform, Common Core, let's be very clear, because you ought to know this, Tom. Common Core was passed in 2010 and was implemented in 2010. Governor Malloy and the commissioner accelerating and doing things had nothing to do with that bill. That was not part of the education reform bill. You ought to know the difference between when the State Board of Education passed it and made it uniform in Connecticut. That was 2010. We never got a vote in the legislature. In fact, it was Republicans in the legislature who demanded and got a public hearing on it, so that all the parents across the state who are frustrated by it, as I was as a parent of a public school child, actually got to have their voices heard. It's the first time they ever got to express their voices about Common Core, and it was because of Republicans in the legislature.
Well, Senator, you've been standing by for 15 years. Well, a lot of bad things have happened here in Connecticut, including Common Core. I don't recall you speaking out against Common Core in 2010 when the bureaucrats passed it, and whether or not that you consider that implementation, or whether when Governor Malloy forced everybody to take it, that's implementation. But it's only pretty recently that I've heard you talking out against Common Core.
Tom, it was passed in 2010 by the State Board of Education when Jody Rell was governor.
Did you object to it
You
at
were
the time?
running for governor in 2010,
Right.
and you never mentioned Common Core. Let's look at every single interview you ever gave. Never once. It had just passed. You were running for governor. You would have been in charge of our education system. You want to say I didn't criticize it. You wanted to be governor.
Did you ever speak
and you
out
never
against it?
mentioned
You were an
Common-
elected official at the time.
Tom, the bureaucrats at the State Board of Ed passed it. We didn't even
Did you
get a
speak
chance
out
to
against
vote
it?
on it. Did you? You
You
didn't.
were an
So
elected
there you go.
official. I wasn't running.
Tom,
the
you wanted to be
government at the
governor.
time.
You wanted to be governor.
Tom, would you change the commissioner? That's what he wants to do.
I've already called for him
Yeah,
to
I
be
think
fired.
we need a new team in there. I think it's important when you're taking a major change in direction on policy, going to what I consider smarter policies, a new direction for the state. We need a new team in there.
I think we have time for one more question, and then there's each of these candidates is going to get a chance to make a final pitch to the voters. So, Susan, give a question here. We'll keep tabs on the time here. Go ahead.
I'm a commuter, and I understand that road work needs to be done, improvements need to be made, but I myself, and I know a lot of other commuters, get tied up in these traffic jams on the highways a lot for lengthy periods of time. Is there a better way that Connecticut can handle getting this work done without messing up people's lives?
Yeah.
That's a tough question.
I tell you, traffic congestion and Metro North operating schedules and lack of punctuality and being shut down for days at a time are just indicative of the impact of having raided the Special Transportation Fund. And poor policy. We simply are not dedicating the resources for our commuters, whether they're in cars or whether they're on mass transit, to get around. And I talk about the impact on families. If you have a mom who's sitting in traffic, and sometimes 2 extra hours a day commuting on the Merritt Parkway or 95 or some areas around Hartford and Waterbury and out in the eastern part of the state, they're away from their kids. This is bad for the state, bad for families. It's simply bad policy. And a lot of people rely on government to solve their problems. And this is such an obvious problem that isn't being solved. This governor has not talked about traffic congestion or solutions to traffic congestion. Actually, he's contributed to it because a lot of these construction projects are holding up traffic, and they seem to be going on interminably. The Merritt Parkway's been under construction for most of the time this governor's been in office. So we simply have to take the honor the pledge that was made to the citizens that the gas tax will be used to as a user tax and kept in the Special Transportation Fund, dedicated to both mass transit and our roads and bridges, and make sure that that money is spent wisely on projects that will maintain them and improve their utility, including reducing congestion.
It's very frustrating. It's one of the reasons why, working with Governor Rell and Democrats, we put together the largest transportation infrastructure program back in 2005 in decades, critical to our state's transportation system, including mass transportation. It's one of the reasons why I fought Governor Malloy, along with other Republicans in the legislature, against spending money on the busway. It's $540-something million that's been wasted that could have been used to fix roads and bridges across the state of Connecticut. But we also need to change internal policies at the Department of Transportation. It takes far too long for projects to get designed, engineered, and approved. We ought to work with the private developers on doing that. They can do it much quicker. A designed build aspect in terms of our bidding is much quicker, much more efficient than what Governor Malloy is now using. It's taking far too long to get projects done in Connecticut.
We only have a couple of minutes here for this. Let me do a quick follow-up on Susan's question. You mentioned the gas tax. The gas tax is a losing proposition because people's cars are getting better mileage, so they're using less gas. So it's not going to generate enough money to do all of this stuff. Do either of you endorse putting tolls somewhere in the state of Connecticut? Quick answer, if you can.
Me for that?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I've talked about possibly using tolls for traffic congestion. Any new source of revenue is just going to result in an increase in spending from the legislature. So if it could be shown that tolls would reduce traffic congestion, could be used, and you could get a one-to-one offset with the gas tax, I might support.
You mean offsetting the losses in the gas tax?
Whatever revenue is generated from tolls, you'd have a dollar-for-dollar reduction in the gas tax. I'd
I'm not
support it.
Yeah, I'm not going to support tolls. It's just a new tax on already overburdened taxpayers. Congestion mitigation pricing is a toll, and it's just going to push people off onto our back roads and our main streets across Connecticut because we don't have the mass transportation. But here's why the gas tax is a losing proposition, in your words, Mark, because people who live in north central Connecticut, like Enfield and Granbury, go to Massachusetts to buy their gasoline. People in Stonington go in southeastern Connecticut, go to Rhode Island to buy their Massachusetts, and even people along the border with New York in Danbury or Greenwich go across the state lines to buy gasoline because it's cheaper. And when they're there, they're buying other things as well. So it's actually hurting our economy. It's hurting small businesses in the state. That's why it's a losing proposition. And when Governor Rowland was in office and we voted to cut the gasoline tax, we actually saw gas tax revenue increase because people were staying home to buy their gasoline.
Right. All right, I think we're just about out of time here, and we want to make sure we have enough time for the candidates to give their summations. Thank you both, by the way, for coming today, and you too, Susan. We had a coin toss when the two gentlemen came here earlier, and the winner of the coin toss was Tom Foley, and he gets a chance to decide how he's going to speak, so he wants to speak last. He'll have the last word, and we have enough for a little more than a minute summation here. So we will start with State Senator John McKinney, who's going to give you his pitch today on why he wants Republican voters to vote for him on Tuesday, primary day.
Well, first, Mark and Sue, thank you very much for letting us do this, and I want to thank the people across the state of Connecticut for watching us this morning. Connecticut faces a fiscal crisis. Governor Malloy is leaving the next governor with a $2.8 billion budget deficit, that despite the largest tax increase in state history, a tax increase that I led the fight against. Dave Walker and I, running together as a team, have put together a very specific plan. We're going to reduce spending by $1.4 billion. We're going to shrink the size of state government because state government is too big. And we're going to reduce taxes, eliminating income taxes on hard-working families who make $75,000 or less. That's how you grow jobs. That's how you grow our economy, by getting our state's fiscal house in order and giving people their money back. Tom believes tax credits, not taxing people, is actually government spending. I fundamentally disagree with that. I think it's your money, not the government's money, and you ought to keep more of your money because you do a better job with it than government. The choice is clear. We cannot allow Dan Malloy to have another 4 years in office. We've seen job-killing tax increases, spending increases across the state of Connecticut. I've led the fight against Dan Malloy for 4 years. I'm the candidate who can stand up, go toe-to-toe with Dan Malloy, and I ask for your vote next Tuesday. Thank you.
Well, your timing is very good because you were just about to be wrapped up. So thanks very much. Tom Foley, it's your turn. You have the last word.
The voters will have a very simple choice on November 4th coming up. Do you approve of the job that Governor Malloy has been doing over the last 4 years? Do you think things are going well in Connecticut? Or do you think we ought to be heading in a different direction with different policies and new leadership? I've been traveling all around the state. I think the answers I'm getting from people is very clear. People want to head in a different direction. They're not happy with Governor Malloy. He's had his chance. He's had his 4 years. And it's time to head in a different direction under smarter policies and new leadership. I have talked about addressing the fiscal challenges in the state. We simply have to provide tax relief for the citizens. We have to get control over spending. I have 35 years of experience doing exactly that in the private sector with large organizations. There is nobody, John McKinney or certainly Governor Malloy, who's going to do a better job of getting control over spending and taking on and fixing our fiscal challenges in this state. With respect to jobs, far too many people in Connecticut still do not have jobs. Many people who have jobs don't have as good a job as they had before Governor Malloy was elected. And so families are under an awful lot of pressure. Coming out of the private sector, having run companies, I understand what employers need and want to hear in order to stay here in Connecticut and grow their businesses. So a change in direction. I'm not a career politician. As I said, I come out of the private sector. I will come and represent regular, everyday citizens at the Capitol. I'm not an insider. I'm not part of the status quo. So that's talking about the choice you'll have in November. You have the same choice on Tuesday of this week. We have John McKinney, who's been up there for 15 years, standing by while many things were done in Connecticut that have hurt our economy and hurt families. You can you vote for maintaining the status quo, more of the same, or you can vote for me, change of direction, change of policies, and get the state headed back in a different direction. We can restore pride and prosperity to Connecticut. I look for your vote on Tuesday. I would very much appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you both for your time. You know, we have a few seconds here. Can I just ask, do you like each other?
Absolutely.
Yes, we do.
Absolutely.
How can that be demonstrated? Can we have a handshake here? And the other question that should have been asked during, but we have the time now. Will each of you pledge to support the other if the other guy wins?
Absolutely.
Without question. Without question.
And right away.
And right away. All right, good. Thanks. Thank you both for being with us. And Susan Haig from the Associated Press News Service, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for joining us as well. Don't forget, if you are a registered Republican, you are eligible to vote for one of these two guys and a number of other races as well, Lieutenant Governor's race. There's a number of others. And also Democrats, you know, there are a number of spirited state legislative races.
Unaffiliates can switch up to noon on Monday
as
well.
Yeah, if you're an unaffiliated
become
voter,
Republicans.
You can switch. If you're unaffiliated, you can switch and become a Republican up to noon on Monday. That's right.
Noon on Monday.
A very, very, very good point. I want to thank you for joining us and remind you that if you tuned in late today, you can see this entire program at our website, WTNH.com. I'm News 8 Chief Political Correspondent Mark Davis. Thanks very much. Have a great day.